Have you ever noticed, the day you finally decide to protect your peace, it feels like the whole world turns against you? Carl Jung uncovered a brutal truth. When empaths, those who give, love, and sacrifice endlessly, finally whisper the word no, suddenly everything changes. Family members call you selfish. Friends who took advantage quietly disappear. People who once leaned on your shoulders act as if you betrayed them. And in that storm, you begin to wonder, am I losing everyone, or am I finally finding myself? But here's the secret Jung revealed. You're not losing relationships, you're exposing them. You're discovering which bonds were built on your self-abandonment and which ones were rooted in real love. Empaths, listen carefully. This moment may feel like death, but in reality, it is your rebirth. Chapter 1. The Boundary Crisis. Imagine carrying the weight of everyone's problems on your shoulders, day after day, year after year. Elizabeth did exactly that. For 15 years, she lived as the perfect fixer, the woman who never let anyone down, the one who always picked up the pieces. She gave so much of herself that she forgot she even existed. And then, her body collapsed. Fatigue crippled her. Panic attacks shook her nights. Migraines blinded her days. Doctors ran every test, but the results came back the same. Nothing's wrong. But something was wrong, not in her body, but in her soul. When Elizabeth sat before Jung in 1923, he didn't ask about her diet, her exercise, or her sleep. He asked a question that pierced her like lightning. When was the last time you said no? She stared at him, frozen, searching her memory. She couldn't remember. Not once in 15 years had she given herself permission to refuse, to rest, to honor her own needs. That silence was the real illness. She wasn't sick because of biology. She was sick because she had abandoned herself in service to everyone else. Jung knew it, and now she was about to know it too. Her sister's voice cracked with accusation. "You've changed. You're not the same person anymore." Her mother called immediately after, laced with worry and suspicion. "Are you sick? What's wrong with you?" And when she turned to her husband for support, instead of comfort, he asked, "Are you breaking down? Are you losing it?" One boundary. Just one. And the world she had spent 15 years holding together began to fall apart. The very people she gave her life to couldn't accept the smallest act of self-respect. Elizabeth returned to Jung in tears. She had done what he asked, but the cost felt unbearable. "I set one boundary," she sobbed, "and I'm losing everyone." Her words trembled with despair, as if she had ripped open the fabric of her entire existence. To her, saying no was like committing social suicide. She couldn't understand why love suddenly felt like loss, why respect suddenly felt like rebellion, why choosing rest turned her into a stranger in her own family. She sat there, shattered, waiting for Jung's explanation. And Jung gave her one, a truth that would split her world in two. "You are not losing everyone," he said, steady and calm. "You are discovering that most of your relationships existed on an unconscious contract. You abandon yourself. They get their needs met. The moment you break that contract, they call it betrayal." His words landed like fire. For the first time, Elizabeth saw it clearly. Her relationships weren't built on love, but on her silence. Not on respect, but on her exhaustion. And when she dared to step out, they trembled in anger because the contract had expired. This is what Jung called the boundary crisis. It feels like collapse. It feels like abandonment. It feels like losing the people you thought would love you unconditionally. But it's not the end of you. It's the beginning. For the first time, you are forcing your world to reveal its true face. Those who only stayed because you abandoned yourself will drift away. And those who love you truly will adjust, accept, and stand beside you. The boundary crisis is not your death sentence. It is your test of truth. And here's the paradox. What feels like destruction is actually creation. What looks like isolation is actually liberation. You are not falling apart. You are falling into alignment with yourself. Empaths, hear this carefully. If you felt the sting of being called selfish, if people accuse you of changing, if relationships crumble because you finally chose peace, It's not loss, it's revelation. The boundary crisis is the universe pulling away the masks, showing you who was real and who was only there to feed on your endless yes. What feels like death is your rebirth. Chapter 2. Exposure. The first phase of setting boundaries is brutal because it is exposure. All those invisible contracts you never signed but silently lived by suddenly become visible. These unspoken deals were written in the shadows. I'll always be available and you'll call it love. I'll manage your emotions and you'll give me belonging. I'll never challenge you and you'll keep me close. You never agreed out loud, but your actions repeated these lines every day, and people grew addicted to it. They confused your endless sacrifice with loyalty. They mistook your silence for devotion, until the day you stop. That's when the panic begins. The moment you finally pause, the world reacts as if you've committed treason. Suddenly, guilt is weaponized against you. People say things like, "You've changed, you're hurting me." Gaslighting slips into conversations. You're overreacting, you're imagining things, you're not who you used to be. Recruitment happens too, where one family member calls another to talk sense into you, to drag you back into the role of caretaker. And when that doesn't work, passive aggression takes the stage. Cold silences, subtle jabs, withdrawal of affection, all designed to punish you back into submission. Not because you've become selfish, but because they've lost access to your self-abandonment. This phase feels unbearable because your nervous system reads it as danger. Neuroscience proves this. Rejection lights up the same brain regions as physical pain. That's why it doesn't just hurt emotionally, it literally hurts physically. Your chest feels heavy, your stomach twists, your mind spirals in panic. You think, if I lose them, I'll lose myself. But what's actually happening is the opposite. You are losing the false version of yourself that kept the peace by destroying your own peace. You are shedding an identity that was never yours to carry. Exposure is messy. It shakes every foundation you thought was solid. The people you thought loved you may suddenly turn into your accusers. The family you thought was unshakable may begin to withdraw. Friends who promised loyalty may vanish into silence. And every part of you wants to run back to say, "I'm sorry, I'll fix it. I'll be who you need me to be again." But Jung reminds us that temptation is not love. It's fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of standing alone. Fear of becoming visible as your authentic self. Yet this is the only way to see the truth. Because here's the paradox. Exposure is not destruction, it's revelation. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop giving people what was never theirs to own, your soul. Suddenly, you see who valued you for your essence, and who only valued you for your compliance. You see who stays when you no longer bleed for them, and who disappears when the free supply of your energy dries up. It feels like a funeral, but it's really a filter. Boundaries don't destroy relationships, they reveal the ones that were never real to begin with. And that's why exposure hurts so deeply. You are grieving illusions. You are mourning the death of relationships that never truly existed, except in your willingness to bend until you broke. The pain is real, but so is the clarity. This is not the end of love. It's the end of illusion. When you survive this phase, you realize you never lost love. You only lost conditions disguised as love. You never lost connection. You only lost control disguised as belonging. And in that truth, you finally breathe freely. Chapter 3. Testing. If you thought exposure was the hardest part, you're not ready for what comes next. Because once the invisible contracts are revealed, the people around you don't just give up. They begin testing you. They will unconsciously pull every string, create every drama, summon every storm just to drag you back into the role you used to play. That silent role of fixer, rescuer, self-sacrificer. It's not because they are evil, it's because they're terrified. Terrified of losing the version of you that gave them everything. And so begins the phase of testing, the fire that tries to burn you back into your old shape. History remembers Florence Nightingale as a pioneer, a woman who transformed medicine and saved countless lives during war. But few know what happened when she returned home. After proving her independence on the battlefield, her own family staged crises, imagined illnesses, false emergencies, endless manipulations. to drag her back into servitude. They couldn't tolerate her freedom because her freedom threatened their control. Florence didn't just face war in hospitals, she faced war in her own home. And this is exactly what empaths face when they finally claim their boundaries. Elizabeth experienced the same storm. After her first no, her sister didn't stop. She escalated. Demands became louder, accusations became sharper. Her mother went further, staging interventions, acting as if Elizabeth's choice to rest was a sickness that needed to be cured. Even her husband joined the chorus, creating emotional crises to force her back into the old rhythm. Every outburst carried one hidden test. Will you abandon yourself again to keep the peace? Every manipulation was designed to see if Elizabeth still had the strength to stand. This is where most people break. The guilt becomes unbearable. The threats sound convincing. The fear of losing everyone you love squeezes your heart like a vice. And so many empaths, who have spent years carrying everyone else's pain, crumble here. They return to the old pattern. They say, fine, I'll help, fine, I'll give in, fine, I'll be who you need me to be. And in that moment, they betray themselves once again. The cycle begins all over. The illness returns. The migraines, the panic, the emptiness, it all comes rushing back. Testing isn't just a phase, it's the battle for your soul. But Jung whispered a crucial truth to Elizabeth, a truth that can save anyone standing in this storm. You can care about their feelings without making their feelings your responsibility. You can have empathy without rescuing. Read that again. Memorize it. Live by it. Because this is the sword that cuts through guilt. You are allowed to love people without losing yourself. You are allowed to witness their emotions without fixing them. Their pain is not your prison. Their discomfort is not your death sentence. Love does not equal self-betrayal. The testing phase is designed to break you. But if you endure, if you refuse to collapse, something extraordinary begins to happen. The manipulations lose their power. The crises no longer hook your nervous system. The guilt no longer chains you back into servitude. It's as if the storm grows weaker every time you don't bend. The same family that accused you of changing slowly realizes they cannot control you. The same friends who punished your boundaries eventually accept your new reality, or they fade away entirely. Testing is not about them. It's about proving to yourself that you can stand. Think of it like emotional gravity. Every person you've rescued, every problem you've solved, every sacrifice you've made, it created a gravitational pull, dragging you back into orbit. Testing is that gravity pulling hardest when you try to break free. But just like a rocket leaving Earth, resistance is strongest right before escape. If you keep pushing, if you don't surrender to guilt, you break free of the pull. And for the first time you realize, peace is not selfish. Peace is power. Boundaries are not betrayal. Boundaries are truth. Empaths understand this. Testing is not a sign you are wrong. It's proof you are transforming. If people create chaos when you choose calm, it means your boundaries are working. If you feel guilt when you stand tall, it means you're breaking generations of conditioning. And if you endure, something powerful happens. You step into a life where love is not earned by sacrifice, but shared in freedom. Testing is the storm before the sunrise. And if you hold your ground, you don't just survive, you awaken. Chapter 4. Sorting. Welcome to the sorting phase, the moment of truth. This is where relationships stop hiding behind illusions and reveal their real nature. Some bonds transform and evolve into something stronger. Some adapt and find a middle ground. And some simply end. It is the emotional equivalent of separating gold from sand. Painful? Yes. But necessary. Because until now, your life has been crowded with relationships that looked like love, but were built on your silence. Sorting is the phase where you finally see who belongs in your future and who only belonged in your past. Elizabeth's story reveals this perfectly. Her husband at first reacted with anger. He was used to her endless giving, her constant availability, her silent service. When she began saying no, he felt rejected, even threatened. But then something shifted. One day he asked himself, "Why am I mad that my wife is caring for herself?" That question changed everything. With therapy, He began to heal his own wounds. He saw how much he had relied on her abandonment. Slowly, their marriage transformed. What once was servitude became partnership. What once was sacrifice became equality. They rebirthed their love into something real. Her mother's journey was different. She never fully understood Elizabeth's boundaries, never grasped why the always available daughter was suddenly creating distance. But love has its own language, and even without full comprehension, her mother began to adapt. The intensity of her demands lessened. The guilt trips softened. Instead of manipulation, there were honest conversations. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Adaptation is not about complete agreement. It's about creating enough space for two people to coexist with dignity. And in that space, a new form of relationship was born. Then came her sister, the one who depended most on Elizabeth's endless yes, the one who mistook servitude for love. When the boundaries came, her response was rage, guilt, withdrawal. She escalated every tactic, accusations, silence, passive aggression, but eventually the bond snapped. She couldn't handle a version of Elizabeth who wouldn't self-destruct to meet her needs. And so, she left. Painful, absolutely, but not failure. Because sometimes endings are not rejections, they are revelations. Her exit didn't mean Elizabeth was wrong. It meant the relationship had no foundation without her self-abandonment. This is what sorting looks like. Transformation, adaptation, exit. Each outcome is a mirror reflecting the truth of your connections. Sorting hurts because it feels like judgment, but it is actually clarity. You're not losing people. You're learning who they really are when you stop betraying yourself. And here lies the paradox. Endings are as sacred as beginnings. Because without endings, you remain trapped in relationships that drain your soul. Without endings, you cannot step into relationships that nourish your spirit. Sorting is not about loss. It's about truth. One nourishing reciprocal friendship is worth 10 extractive ones. One relationship rooted in equality is worth 100 built on dependency. This is the lesson the sorting phase burns into your soul. You finally understand that peace cannot coexist with parasitism. Love cannot coexist with manipulation, and respect cannot coexist with your silence. The people who remain after sorting are not just companions, they are your tribe. They are the ones who love you, not for your sacrifice, but for your essence. And when you stand among them, you finally realize you never lost. You only won. Chapter 5. The Isolation Trap. Boundaries save your life, but Jung warned they can also turn into a prison. There's a danger when the pendulum swings too far, mistaking boundaries for walls and peace for isolation. This is where many seekers of growth stumble. At first, they courageously cut toxic ties, release draining friendships, and step out of unhealthy systems. That is good, that is healing. But some go further, severing not just poison, but nourishment too. And soon, what began as self-respect turns into self-exile. The line between solitude and isolation is razor thin, and crossing it can cost you your soul. Heinrich, a man Jung once treated, is the perfect example. At first, his steps were wise. He freed himself from a toxic family who drained him endlessly. He let go of false obligations and oppressive structures, but then one by one, he cut everything. He left his romantic partner, abandoned his job, and walked away from his community, even his church. When he finally sat in Jung's office, he didn't say he was lonely. He said something far more dangerous. "I'm too evolved for ordinary people. I only need myself." What looked like strength was actually despair in disguise. Jung's response was sharp but compassionate. Individuation does not isolate. It connects, but on conscious terms. This is the truth many forget. Individuation, the journey of becoming your true self, is not about withdrawing from the world. It is about entering it with authenticity. It is about choosing bonds instead of being chained by them. Jung saw clearly. Heinrich was not enlightened. He was trapped. He was wearing the mask of superiority to hide the wound of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of intimacy, fear of being hurt again. His isolation wasn't wholeness. It was a fortress built from pain. How do you know if you've fallen into this trap? There are signs. The first is how you interpret conflict. If every disagreement becomes, "They're unconscious, I'm more evolved," you're not growing, you're escaping. Growth doesn't make you untouchable, it makes you more compassionate. The second sign is total disconnection. If you've lost not just toxic bonds, but all bonds, friends, family, community, you may have crossed from healthy boundary into unhealthy isolation. And the third sign is subtle but deadly. Your mental health declines, but you disguise it as spiritual superiority. You're not happier, you're emptier. Isolation feels safe because it removes the triggers. No conflict, no criticism, no risk of betrayal. But in truth, it removes the medicine too. Connection is where you learn, grow, and refine your soul. Jung knew that without tension, without relationship, individuation collapses into narcissism. Alone you may feel powerful, but you also risk losing empathy. You begin to confuse your echo for truth. You stop being challenged, and in that silence, your shadow grows unchecked. What feels like protection eventually becomes poison. Isolation is not mastery, it is avoidance. Empaths are especially vulnerable to this trap. After years of overgiving, they swing to the opposite extreme, cutting everything. It feels liberating at first. No more demands, no more guilt, no more being drained. But slowly, the loneliness creeps in. The nights grow heavy, the silence feels endless, and without realizing it, they begin to wear superiority as armor. They convince themselves, "I don't need anyone. I'm beyond ordinary people." But this is not transcendence. It's fear masquerading as enlightenment. It's the soul tricking itself into safety while starving of true connection. Remember this. Boundaries are bridges, not walls. They are meant to connect you to others with honesty, not cut you off completely. They create space for relationships that honor who you are, not excuses to abandon every relationship. Jung's wisdom is timeless here. Real growth doesn't shrink your world, it expands it. Real individuation doesn't isolate you, it roots you more deeply into the human family, but with clarity and strength. The goal is not to end all connection. The goal is to create conscious connection. That is where peace becomes power. So if you find yourself saying, "I only need myself," pause. Ask, is this truth or is this fear? Have you found peace or are you hiding from pain? Isolation may feel like control, but it is often just another form of abandonment, the abandonment of your own humanity. Empaths, remember, your gift was never meant to be buried in walls of stone. It was meant to shine in relationships where reciprocity lives. Wholeness is not isolation. Wholeness is the courage to connect consciously, without losing yourself. That is individuation. That is freedom. Chapter 6. Rebuilding. 6 months after the painful sorting, Elizabeth's life looked like an empty garden. So many relationships had fallen away, and silence filled the spaces where chaos once lived. But then something unexpected happened. She met Marie. And this time it was different. There were no invisible contracts, no hidden demands, no subtle manipulations. Marie respected time. She listened without making Elizabeth her therapist. She shared her truth without guilt. And when Elizabeth said no, Marie didn't rage, she accepted. For the first time in years, Elizabeth cried, but these weren't tears of exhaustion. They were tears of recognition. So this is what friendship feels like, without bleeding for it. This moment marked the beginning of rebuilding, the phase where relationships stop being transactions of survival and start becoming partnerships of wholeness. In rebuilding, you no longer abandon yourself to earn love. You bring your entire self to the table, and so does the other person. It's not about one carrying the other endlessly. It's about a sacred exchange, where support flows both ways, where space is respected, where love breathes instead of suffocates. Elizabeth discovered that peace was not loneliness. Peace was finally being met by someone who valued her essence, not her exhaustion. Jung described this transformation as the transcendent function, the paradox of human wholeness. To be strong, yet to need help. To be independent, yet to remain connected. To be boundaried, yet to experience intimacy. For Elizabeth, Marie embodied this paradox. She could stand on her own, but she could also lean without shame. She could love deeply, but without losing herself. This was individuation in practice, not running from connection, not drowning in it, but walking the razor's edge where true relationships live. It is here that life feels less like survival and more like sacred partnership. Rebuilding is not about numbers. It's about depth. You may lose 10 extractive friendships, but gain one authentic bond that nourishes your soul more than all 10 ever did. You may step out of toxic family patterns, but discover a chosen family who accepts you as you are. Rebuilding teaches you that quality replaces quantity and that peace replaces chaos. For Elizabeth, Marie became a mirror of healthy connection, proof that she was never too much or too selfish. She had simply been offering herself to the wrong people. Rebuilding is when you finally learn love exists without exhaustion. Chapter 7. The Toolkit. When the storms of boundaries pass, when the sorting is complete and the rebuilding has begun, there is still one essential step: maintenance. Jung taught that individuation is not a one-time victory. It is a lifelong practice. Elizabeth learned this the hard way. The patterns of self-abandonment are like weeds. If left unchecked, they creep back into the garden of your life. That's why she created a ritual she called the boundary audit. Once a month, she sat down with pen and paper, asking herself 3 piercing questions. This practice became her shield and compass, ensuring she never slipped back into the chains she had once escaped. The first question was simple but revolutionary. Does this person respect my limits? Elizabeth had once believed love meant erasing her limits, but now she saw the opposite. Real love recognizes boundaries as sacred. If someone grew angry every time she said no, that was not love. It was control. If someone tried to stretch her limits until they broke, that was not connection. It was consumption. This one question became her clarity tool. If the answer was consistently no, she knew she wasn't in a relationship. She was in a transaction where her peace was the currency, and that was no longer acceptable. The second question cut even deeper. Do I feel energized or drained after being with this person? Elizabeth realized that the body never lies. When she left certain conversations, she felt lighter, alive, inspired. That was a sign of nourishment. But with others, she left exhausted, anxious, or hollow. That was a sign of extraction. Jung often reminded his patients, pay attention to how you feel after, not during. Because during, you may laugh, you may nod, you may pretend, but afterward the truth shows itself. Energy is the most honest measure of relationship health, and Elizabeth learned to trust it. The third question sealed the audit. Is there reciprocity over time? Relationships are not a perfect 50-50 split every moment. Sometimes you give more, sometimes they do. But over time, balance must emerge. Elizabeth mapped this out. Who checks on me without needing something? Who listens as much as they speak? Who shows up when I am the one in need? If reciprocity was absent, she marked the relationship as a drain, not a bond. This wasn't about keeping score, it was about truth. Because reciprocity is the heartbeat of real love. Without it, connection becomes chains. Elizabeth's toolkit didn't stop at asking questions. It was about acting on the answers. If someone failed the audit, she gave herself 2 choices: renegotiate or release. Renegotiating meant having an honest conversation, asking for change, resetting the terms of the bond. If the other person was willing, growth happened, but if not, she released. Release no longer felt like failure. It felt like respect. Respect for her own worth, respect for her time, respect for the life she was building. This practice was how she guarded her soul, month after month, year after year. But perhaps the most important part of her toolkit was the reminder she etched into her journal. I did not survive toxic love to spend my life alone. I survived so I could finally taste real connection. This line became her anchor. Boundaries were not about rejecting love. They were about preparing for real love. Isolation was not the goal. Wholeness was. Elizabeth carried this mantra through every season. Whenever guilt whispered, whenever loneliness echoed, she repeated it like prayer. She had not escaped to live in exile, she had escaped to finally live in truth. This toolkit turned into her lifelong compass. It protected her from falling back into self-abandonment. It exposed hidden contracts before they grew into chains. It guided her toward people who valued her essence instead of exploiting her silence. Most importantly, it reminded her that she was worthy of relationships where both people remained whole. No more bleeding to keep others alive. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. Her audit became her declaration, "I will never betray myself again." And with that vow, her soul found peace. Empaths, this is your inheritance too. Create your own boundary audit. Ask the same questions. Demand reciprocity. Refuse to accept exhaustion as love. And remember, you did not crawl through the fire of toxic bonds just to sit in ashes. You survived so you could finally sit at a table where love is free, respect is natural, and peace is mutual. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. And when you guard those doors wisely, the right people will walk in, and the wrong ones will stay out. That is the toolkit. That is your freedom. Conclusion. Peace isn't loss, empaths. Listen with your whole heart. When you finally choose peace, it feels like the world is walking out on you. Family calls you selfish. Friends disappear. Lovers accuse you of changing. But here's the deepest truth Carl Jung revealed. You are not losing people. You are losing contracts. They were never with you. They were with your self-abandonment. And when those false contracts burn away, something new rises in their place. Clarity, reciprocity, and wholeness. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you truly are does not beg for love, does not bleed to belong, does not fragment itself to keep the peace. Choosing peace isn't loss. It is revelation. It is the sacred fire that purifies your life, leaving behind only what is true. Yes, it feels like death, but from those ashes, real love will rise. The kind that respects boundaries. The kind that nourishes, not drains. The kind that doesn't fear your no, but honors it as proof of your soul's dignity." Carl Jung reminded us, in the final analysis, the essential thing is the life of the individual. This alone makes history, this alone makes the future. Your life, your peace, your wholeness, it matters. Do not abandon yourself for anyone, because once you truly become yourself, you will attract those who love you for exactly that. Comment below. I'm discovering who was real. Share this with someone who's afraid to set boundaries. They need this clarity. Subscribe, because here we don't abandon ourselves to be loved. We become whole. And wholeness always attracts love that lasts.